Opinions on Julian were mixed among those who knew him. Some found him to be arrogant and ostentatious, quick to flash his wealth, while others insisted that beneath the polished exterior was a genuinely kind and generous man. Ava often confided in her sister, speaking of Julian's witty sense of humor and the profound sense of security he made her feel. The strains of a long-distance relationship. As their relationship progressed, the 3,000-mile distance between New York and San Francisco began to take its toll. Both were strong-willed, independent individuals with demanding careers. Friends noted that their passionate connection often flared into intense arguments over the phone, primarily fueled by the frustration of their separation and conflicting schedules. On one occasion, after a particularly nasty fight about future plans, Ava ended the relationship, believing their lifestyles were too incompatible. However, after a month of reflection and persistent courting from Julian, they reconciled, more committed than ever to making it work. In a grand romantic gesture, Ava made the significant decision to leave her high-powered job in New York and move to a luxury high-rise apartment in Seattle, a city Julian frequented for business, to be closer to him and signal her commitment to their future. Later, her parents flew out to Napa Valley to formally meet Julian's family. Fuad recalled feeling somewhat intimidated by the Daniels' obvious wealth. Their estate was palatial, but found them to be warm, welcoming, and genuinely enthusiastic about the union. Everyone who met Julian was impressed. He was polite, well-educated, ambitious, and he and Ava appeared deeply in love and perfectly suited. A lavish wedding and ominous signs. A fairy tale celebration. Ava confided in her father that Julian held traditional values and did not believe in premarital sex, a fact which Fuad took as a sign of his deep respect for his daughter and his commitment to their future marriage. After the successful family meetings and with both families' blessings, Julian and Ava became engaged. They planned a spectacular 3-day wedding extravaganza for October 2010 at the luxurious resort at Pelican Hill in Newport Beach, California. The event was nothing short of magnificent, a testament to both families' desire to celebrate the union in the grandest style. Ava had spent nearly 6 months meticulously planning every detail, from the custom-designed Vera Wang gown to the 5-tiered wedding cake and the performance of a famous jazz band. Fuad, though his wealth was substantial, he noted that it was eclipsed by the Daniels' fortune. Nevertheless, he had been saving for his children's weddings since their birth and was determined to give Ava the celebration she had always dreamed of, sparing no expense. However, beneath the veneer of perfect happiness, some of Ava's closest friends detected a subtle unease. One bridesmaid later mentioned that Ava seemed strangely detached during the festivities, as if she were playing a part rather than living it.
Another close friend from college commented that the entire wedding, while beautiful, felt curated and impersonal, a stark contrast to the warm, vivacious woman they knew. It was a fairy tale setting, but some wondered if the pressure to maintain that perfect image was already weighing heavily on the bride. A honeymoon destination revealed. Arrival and an unexpected guide. Following the whirlwind 3-day wedding celebration, Julian and Ava Daniels embarked on their honeymoon. 3 weeks after exchanging vows, they boarded a flight to South Africa for a 10-day trip. Julian had planned the entire itinerary as a surprise, revealing only the destination at the airport. He told friends and family he had chosen South Africa because it represented them, S for Julian and A for Ava. After a busy few days on safari in Kruger National Park, they flew to Cape Town International Airport on the afternoon of Friday, November 12th. Exhausted but excited, they looked for transport to their hotel. Julian, despite their immense wealth, bypassed the luxury private car services and opted for a cheaper metered taxi from the airport rank. A driver named Zola Tunju pulled up in his silver Volkswagen Jetta, and the couple began the 20-minute journey to the 5-star Cape Grace Hotel on the scenic Victoria and Alfred waterfront. Before dropping them off, Julian engaged Tunju in conversation, asking if he would be available the following evening to take them to dinner. He expressed a desire to see the real Cape Town, not just the tourist spots. Tunju agreed to act as their unofficial tour guide for the evening. A fateful night out. An ill-fated decision. The following day, the couple spent a leisurely afternoon exploring the waterfront, enjoying drinks at a few upscale bars, and taking photos with Table Mountain as a backdrop. Julian had made a reservation at the renowned Test Kitchen, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. Tunju picked them up at the Cape Grace at around 7:30 p.m. However, en route to the restaurant, Julian and Ava decided they weren't in the mood for a formal multi-course meal and asked Tunju if he knew of a place with a more relaxed local vibe. Tunju said he knew just the spot and took them to a casual seafood grill in the Greenpoint area. They stayed for a couple of hours before Tunju returned to pick them up around 10:30 p.m. According to Julian's subsequent statements to police, Ava was eager to experience the authentic culture of South Africa, specifically expressing a curiosity about the nightlife in the townships. He claimed she insisted that Tunju drive them through Guguletu to see what life was really like there. Guguletu was and remains an area with an exceptionally high crime rate. Local residents stated that it was rare for anyone to leave their homes after dark, let alone for tourists to willingly drive through. Between 2005 and 2010, over 700 people had been murdered in Guguletu, a rate of approximately 1 murder every 2.5 days.
Police officials themselves admitted they would only enter certain parts of the township in large, armed groups. The ambush and kidnapping. At approximately 10:45 p.m., Tunju slowed the Volkswagen to a stop at a quiet intersection in Guguletu. Suddenly, 2 armed men rushed the vehicle, brandishing handguns and hammering on the windows. They forced their way into the car, one shoving Tunju aside to take the driver's seat, the other climbing into the back with the terrified couple. The hijacker drove for nearly an hour through a labyrinth of dark, dusty streets, while the assailant in the back seat demanded jewelry, phones, and wallets. They took Julian's Rolex, his wallet, and Ava's diamond earrings and wedding band. The couple clung to each other in sheer terror. Finally, the car screeched to a halt. The driver announced that they did not want to hurt them and would let them go, but separately. They forced Julian out of the car onto the side of a desolate road in the Yanga Township. The Volkswagen then sped off into the night, leaving Julian stumbling in the darkness with Ava still inside. The aftermath and discovery. A desperate search begins. Disoriented and in a state of shock, Julian wandered the dark, unfamiliar streets for nearly an hour before he found a house with its lights on. He knocked on the door, and when the homeowner answered, Julian, crying and visibly traumatized, begged to use the phone to report the carjacking and his wife's kidnapping. The man later stated that Julian was so agitated he could barely string a coherent sentence together. The police were called and arrived shortly after. They took Julian to the local station and began patrolling the area, trying to piece together the night's events. They also quickly located the taxi driver, Zola Tunjo, who had independently reported the hijacking at a different police station. Everyone then reconvened at the Cape Grace Hotel. The hotel manager spoke with both Julian and Tunju and later commented on the sheer improbability of the situation, finding it bizarre that a couple on their honeymoon at one of the city's most secure luxury hotels would request a tour of its most dangerous neighborhoods in the middle of the night. Meanwhile, across the world, Fuad Nadir received a panicked call from Julian's father in San Francisco, informing him that Ava had been kidnapped. Fuad, a man of means and influence, remained confident that they could and would pay any ransom demanded to secure his daughter's safe return. Shortly after, he received a second, more devastating call. this time from Julian himself, who, through tears, told his father-in-law how sorry he was that he had failed to protect Ava. The investigation unfolds. A tragic discovery. Fuad booked the first available flight out of O'Hare, connecting through Amsterdam to Cape Town. As he was in the air, Cape Town police received a call from a resident of Yanga reporting a silver Volkswagen Jetta that had been abandoned on the side of the road all night. At 8 a.m. on Sunday morning, police units arrived at the vehicle. There, slumped on the back seat, was the body of Ava Daniels. She had been shot once in the neck at point-blank range. The bullet had lodged in the seat upholstery. A forensic pathologist would later confirm she had bled to death and had likely been alive for some time after the shooting.
Tragically, Fuad received this news via a phone call from a family friend as he was boarding his connecting flight in Amsterdam. He spent the remainder of the journey to South Africa in a state of complete and utter numbness. Initial arrests and a shocking claim. One of the first officers on the scene that morning later said he knew instantly this would not be a straightforward case. He found it suspicious that Tanju, a local taxi driver who knew the city intimately, would ever agree to drive tourists into Guguletu at night. When questioned, Tanju simply replied, "She insisted." Ava's sister, Amelia, stated she simply did not believe it. Ava was savvy, well-traveled, and acutely aware of potential dangers. The investigating officer also questioned why the assailants would have released both Tanju and Julian unharmed, knowing they would immediately go to the police and be able to identify them, and then drive off with only Ava, whom they subsequently killed. Quote, "It just doesn't add up," the officer stated. Ava's murder sent shockwaves through South Africa and made international headlines. While the country had a high crime rate, the brutal and seemingly senseless killing of a beautiful young bride on her honeymoon was a tragedy that captured global attention. The South African Police Service, SAPS, dedicated significant resources to solving the case. A conspiracy theory emerged. Initially, Zola Tanju was highly cooperative with police. The investigation moved quickly, and within days, forensic evidence led them to the two alleged hijackers. Fingerprints lifted from the interior and exterior of the Volkswagen led directly to a man named Mangizi Lenny, whose prints were on file from a previous arrest. He was apprehended at his home. During the search, police found a cell phone stuffed between the mattress and bed frame. When asked about it, Lenny claimed it belonged to the taxi driver, Zola Tanju. Lenny almost immediately confessed to his involvement and informed police that the other wanted man was Zwamadoda Kombi, aged 26. Kombi was found and arrested 2 days later. By this time, Julian had already returned to the United States. During interrogation, Kombi added a third new name to the mix, Mondesi Malambo, a receptionist at a different hotel. As Kombi was being led out of one interrogation session, Malambo was being brought in. Passing each other, Kombi, in English, said to Malambo, "Tell them everything." Soon after, police announced a stunning development. The 31-year-old taxi driver, who had been so cooperative, was now also under arrest for the murder of Ava Daniels. Friends of Tanju expressed total shock, describing him as a responsible, law-abiding family man with no criminal record. Julian, however, told a journalist that he had already begun to suspect Tanju's involvement, so the arrest wasn't a complete surprise to him.
The case against the groom, the driver's accusation. As the investigation continued, Zola Tanju, in a bid for a reduced sentence, made a series of explosive claims that turned the case on its head. Brought before the Wynberg Magistrates Court with his face covered by a sheet, he indicated he was likely to enter a plea agreement. Tunju claimed the hijacking was not a random attack. He stated that on the day he picked the couple up from the airport, Julian lingered outside the car talking to him for nearly 10 minutes while Ava went inside the hotel. Surveillance footage confirmed this extended conversation. According to Tunju, Julian said he wanted to get someone out of the way. Tunju claimed he told Julian he wasn't the man for that job, but knew people who could be. He alleged Julian offered 15,000 South African rand, roughly 2,000 USD at the time, for the hit. Suspicions mount. Police stated that Tunju's claims are supported by a significant amount of surveillance footage, though others argued the same footage also supported Julian's version of events. Tunju said that after dropping the couple off, he went to the hotel where Malombo worked, and together they contacted Kombi to set the plan in motion. Phone records showed numerous calls between Malombo, Tunju, and Kombi in the hours leading up to the murder. A surveillance camera at Malombo's hotel, equipped with audio, even picked him up saying during one call, "The thing we talked about must happen." Tunju further alleged that he met Julian around noon on the day of the murder so Julian could exchange currency at a place with a better rate than the hotel offered. Fuad Nadir corroborated part of this, recalling that he had called Ava's phone that afternoon and Julian had answered, saying they were at a market changing money. Tunju claimed that outside the restaurant that night, Julian pulled him aside and asked if he had arranged everything with the men. Tunju assured him it was all set. He also alleged that during the drive to Gugulutu, he and Julian exchanged several text messages. He claimed Julian informed him the money was in an envelope in the back pocket of the passenger seat. Police confirmed through cell site analysis that multiple calls and texts were exchanged between their two phones that night. However, as Julian's phone was never recovered, the content of those messages would likely never be known. Legal maneuvers and testimony. Plea deals, and a web of accusations. The case became a media circus. Faced with an impossible and painful decision, Ava's family, after much anguish, ultimately agreed to accept Tunju's plea deal, stating that despite their confusion, they wanted the truth above all else. Julian's lawyers, some of the most powerful in South Africa, called the state's case absurd, arguing it was inconceivable that Julian would ask the first taxi driver he met in Cape Town to arrange his wife's murder. They insisted the evidence proved nothing concrete.
Just over a month after Ava's murder, Zola Tunj was sentenced to 18 years in prison after entering into a plea agreement. Malumbo and Kombi soon followed, both also pointing the finger at Julian Daniels. Kombi was offered a reduced sentence of 25 years in exchange for pleading guilty and agreeing to testify against Julian in any future criminal proceedings. No deal was offered to Mangizi Lechiani, who later pleaded not guilty in court. Authorities stated there was no point in offering him a deal, as he could provide no additional information useful to the case. His trial was delayed while he underwent surgery to remove a brain tumor, but he was eventually convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. The receptionist, Mondesi Malumbo, admitted his involvement but was granted full immunity from prosecution in exchange for his promise to give truthful testimony against Julian, a move that shocked many, given he was the one who had contacted Kombi to arrange the murder. Malumbo stated in court, "I want to confirm here that Mr. Daniels knew everything from the beginning to the end." A potential motive is revealed. Soon, Julian found himself the subject of an Interpol red notice, with South African authorities seeking his extradition on charges of conspiring to murder Ava. But despite the accusations from the convicted men, there was no clear motive. Friends said he wouldn't gain financially from Ava's death as there was no life insurance policy, and by all accounts, the couple had no significant marital problems. However, an interview published in the British tabloid The Sun provided South African police with a potential motive. Anonymous emails had been sent to the newspaper suggesting Julian was gay. A male escort named Leopold Leiser, known to his clients as the German, came forward and claimed that Julian had confessed to him that he was in a relationship he needed to get out of. Julian and his family maintained that this was all nonsense. Julian asked, "I had just married the girl of my dreams. Why would I want to kill her?" But police began to speculate that perhaps Ava had discovered Julian was hiding this secret about his sexuality during the honeymoon, triggering the tragic events. The trial and acquittal. The case crumbles. Although Fuad had initially defended his son-in-law against any suggestion of involvement, he later revealed that as time passed, doubts began to creep in. "I have spoken with my son-in-law, and there are more questions than answers," he said. Investigators noted that the crime scene was atypical. A major red flag was that the expensive car was left intact, rather than being stripped for parts or burned. Fuad also noted that Julian's account of the night's events seemed to shift, with times and details changing. For instance, Julian initially told authorities the hijackers had taken all of Ava's jewelry. Yet after her body was found, he called an officer and asked him to check the backseat of the Jetta, claiming he would find Ava's 25,000-pound engagement ring there. It was indeed there. When asked why he hadn't mentioned this in his original statement, Julian said he was in shock and was now amending his testimony. Furthermore, Julian hosted a pizza party the night before Ava's funeral, an act Fuad found deeply inappropriate and disrespectful. Julian was later admitted to a private psychiatric facility in San Francisco. It was reported he was suffering from severe depression and PTSD following his wife's death. He had reportedly lost a significant amount of weight. Due to his psychological state, his extradition hearings were delayed for a long period, but finally began in a federal court in San Francisco. On the first day of the hearing, the topic of his sexuality was addressed. In a written statement read by his lawyers, Julian stated that despite his previous denials, he was in fact bisexual. Ava's family spoke of their devastation at not having known this about him, stating they felt betrayed. A list of omissions issued by the court showed Julian had been browsing gay pornographic sites and dating apps during the honeymoon and within hours of Ava's body being discovered. The prosecution argued this, alongside the statements from the German, Leopold Laser, showed a man desperate to hide a major part of his life and provided a motive for wanting out of the marriage. The presiding judge, Janet Traverso, listened to both sides and ultimately ruled that the evidence relating to Julian's sexuality was inadmissible. Contradictory evidence and a case dismissed. More witnesses came forward for the prosecution, suggesting Julian and Ava's relationship, while seemingly perfect, was far from it. Ava had sent several text messages to her cousins in the weeks before the wedding, saying things like, "I hate him. We fight so much. I told him I'm going home, and I wish I had never said yes." One particularly sad message read, "Crying has become my new hobby." The day after the honeymoon began, she sent another. "I'm really trying. He is a very good man in all respects, but I am not happy with him at all." Others argued that any disagreements were normal, trivial newlywed squabbles, and the stress of planning a large wedding had likely left Ava emotionally drained. The prosecution's star witness was Zola Tunju. The entire case hinged on his testimony. He was the only one who could testify to the alleged conspiracy, as he was the only one who had spoken directly to Julian. One key piece of footage showed Tunju and Julian talking in the hotel lobby the day after the murder. A cleaner was also visible in the frame. Tunju claimed this conversation was Julian asking him to keep the matter private. After the cleaner left, Tunju alleged Julian asked, "Was the job done?" and that Tunju warned him a camera was directly above them. Julian allegedly looked up at the camera for a second before looking away. Julian stated this was a completely innocent conversation about the previous night's traumatic events.
Further footage was presented showing Julian and Tunju meeting again at the hotel. Julian, who was sitting with Fuad in one of the lounges, was seen carrying a white envelope or parcel. He was followed by Tunju to a more private area away from Fuad and other guests. Tunju then left the hotel, carrying the same parcel, and went to his car. Julian returned empty-handed. The state alleged this was the promised payment for the hit. Julian's defense argued it was simply cash for Tunju's services as a driver. Some found this perfectly logical, while others questioned why, if it was a simple payment, the exchange had to happen in a private area, away from cameras and Ava's grieving father. It was soon discovered that Tunju, Malumbo, and Kambi had all committed perjury. Their testimonies were riddled with inconsistencies and contradictions, and they admitted to not being entirely truthful in parts of their statements. This fatally undermined the state's already complex and shaky case. Julian's defense grew stronger by the day as the prosecution's case and its key witness imploded. The case is dismissed. On the third day of Julian's trial, his defense team applied to have the case thrown out of court, arguing it was so deeply flawed it should not proceed. After 4 long years since Ava Daniels' murder, Judge Janet Traverso delivered a scathing statement criticizing the prosecution's case against Julian Daniels. She stated the evidence presented by the state's witnesses was riddled with contradictions and ordered that Julian be acquitted of all charges. Julian stated, "Because of the proven perjury of these witnesses, a vicious campaign was waged against me which failed in its pursuit of the truth of what happened that night." Ava's family was utterly devastated. Part 12. Conclusion. A lingering mystery. An enduring enigma. Following Julian's acquittal, Ava's family petitioned a coroner's court in Illinois to reopen the inquest into her death, which would have forced Julian to answer questions publicly under oath. However, the coroner stated there was insufficient cause to begin a new inquiry, and that he was prohibited from reaching a conclusion that contradicted the findings of the South African courts. According to news reports, as of 2018, Julian was still living in the San Francisco Bay Area with a boyfriend he had been with for about 18 months at the time. The murder of Ava Daniels remains a deeply divisive case that continues to haunt her family. Many believe it was a random carjacking that ended in either intentional or accidental murder, and that everything in between was a tragic coincidence. They feel that anything that seems to point toward Julian is unfair and lacks concrete evidence. Some believe it was a scheme concocted by Zola Tunju when he saw the wealthy, well-dressed couple with their expensive luggage and jewelry, seeing an opportunity for a kidnapping and extortion plot that went horribly wrong. However, others remain convinced that Julian Daniels masterminded the entire ordeal and got away with a heinous crime. The conflicting narratives from the multiple individuals involved mean the full truth of what happened that night, how it happened, and whether there was any connection between the 5 men present on that fateful evening will likely remain unknown forever. The case stands as a tragic testament to a life cut short, a family's endless grief, and a justice system that provided answers for some, but none for closure.